The Venetian blinds in the conference room were drawn low, cutting the afternoon light into sharp, rigid lines across the table. Outside, the summer heat was relentless. But inside, the air conditioning blew a steady, spine-chilling cold. 3 senior partners from the venture capital firm sat across the long mahogany table, immaculate in their tailored suits, their faces unreadable. I sat off to the side in the seat designated for the chief technology officer, my fingers resting on the freshly printed system architecture assessment report. My wife, Evelyn, stood beside the projector in a sharp black pantsuit, every strand of hair pinned flawlessly into place. Beside her stood Carter, the senior partner who had joined the company just last week. Carter wore a bespoke suit, a brimming, triumphant smile plastered across his face. Today's meeting was the crucial closing session for our second round of funding, a $10 million deal. To prepare for this day, I had locked myself in the lab for 3 straight weeks, optimizing our core algorithm's back-end compatibility by 400%. Evelyn cleared her throat, her eyes sweeping across the room. Finally, her gaze settled on me. Cold, detached, and utterly unyielding. Before we walk through this quarter's technical achievements, I need to announce a fresh decision from the board of directors, she said, her voice as flat as a routine press release. In light of our upcoming international expansion and the need to streamline our operational framework, I am speaking on behalf of management to announce the immediate termination of our current CTO, Eric. The air in the room instantly turned to ice. Across the table, Victor, the chief investment officer, froze with his coffee cup halfway to his lips and frowned. President Evelyn, Victor said, setting his cup down, it's my understanding that Eric is the primary architect behind your core matching engine. Are you sure an executive swap at this critical juncture has been thoroughly evaluated? Evelyn didn't even grant Victor a proper moment to press further. She raised her chin slightly, her tone clipped and resolute. Mr. Victor, it is precisely because we are at a critical juncture in our fundraising that we need someone with a higher degree of professional rigor and a global strategic vision to lead our engineering division. She gestured toward Carter. Carter holds dual master's degrees in computer science and finance from top-tier universities, and he previously led a team of over 100 engineers at a major tech giant. Eric, on the other hand, has tech philosophies that simply can no longer keep pace with our expansion. More importantly, his insular management style inside the team has severely dragged down our product iteration timelines. I sat frozen in my chair, my palms ice cold. I looked at the woman I had been married to for 4 years. 4 years ago, the two of us sat in a cramped basement, sharing cold pizza while sketching out the initial data models on paper. Back then, she told me I was the smartest, most trustworthy person she had ever met. To let her shine at industry summits and high society networking events, I deliberately stepped into the background, taking nothing more than a modest title as CTO. I placed every legal title, corporate registration, and nominal share entirely under her name. I thought that was what implicit trust between a husband and wife looked like. Yet now, in front of our lead investors, she reduced years of my sleepless nights and relentless engineering into a neat little label. Insular. Carter stepped forward, adjusting his tie, and offered the investors a practiced, polite bow. Thank you for the trust, President Evelyn, he said softly. Gentlemen, please rest assured, over the past week, I have taken over full administrative access to the core code repositories and restructured our technical roadmap. In my professional view, Eric's previous architecture was overly conservative, sluggish. I am confident that within the next month, I can double the system's total throughput. Carter's claim was full of holes. The high-frequency data matching algorithm we developed relied on an intricate, highly specific underlying architecture. To guarantee rock-solid security, it used a rare combination of dual-layer encryption and distributed node verification. Without my real-time fine-tuning of the underlying logic, forcefully pumping up throughput would do nothing but crash the entire stack. Yet I didn't blow up. I simply raised my head and looked Evelyn straight in the eyes. Evelyn, I said softly, are you absolutely certain you want to revoke my system credentials and fire me right here? Today, in front of our investors? Evelyn avoided my gaze entirely. Instead, she slid a pre-printed termination agreement across the polished table. The paper glided over the slick wood, coming to a stop against my fingers. Eric, mind your form of address. We are in a professional setting, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. The company will pay your severance in strict accordance with labor regulations. Please pack your personal belongings, turn over all security keys and your access badge, and vacate the building within 30 minutes. Your continued presence here will only disrupt our proceedings with the investors. Across the table, Victor shot me a deep, probing look before glancing between Evelyn and Carter. Ultimately, he chose to say nothing. The business world cares only about results, never sentiment. To the investors, Evelyn was the founder and CEO who owned 100% of the nominal equity. I was just an employee who could be replaced at any time. I picked up the pen resting on the table. No arguments, no questions, not even a flicker of rage on my face. I calmly signed my name on the line at the bottom of the document. Carter watched my pen move, a subtle, mocking curl lifting the corner of his mouth. He leaned in close, his voice lowered so only the two of us could hear. Thanks for laying the groundwork, Eric. But moving forward, this company, and Evelyn, won't be needing you anymore. I looked up at Carter, then shifted my eyes to Evelyn, who stood nearby looking utterly unbothered. 4 years of sweat, sacrifice, and endless nights reduced to a cold piece of paper. They genuinely believed that by stripping my title and seizing my repositories, they could simply coast on my legacy. They had no idea what foundation this company was actually built upon. I stood up, unclipped my employee badge, and laid it softly on the table. As you wish, Evelyn. I gathered my personal items from the table and packed them into the canvas bag I had brought with me. The moment I stepped through the conference room door, I heard Evelyn behind me, passionately pitching Carter's credentials to the investors in a tone that was bright, warm, and brimming with pride. I didn't turn back. I walked down the central aisle of the office. Around me, colleagues cast glances filled with pity, confusion, or cold indifference. Carter had been building his internal faction for days, while I had done nothing but bury my head in the server rooms. In everyone's eyes, I was leaving today as a complete and utter loser. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the tower. The bright sunlight outside burned my eyes. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. It rang twice before a voice picked up. "Sir, you've finally reached out," said Davis, my veteran corporate attorney, his voice steady and grounded. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the towering glass facade reflecting the city sky. "Davis, activate the original equity proxy agreement we signed 4 years ago, and notify the patent office and legal custody team to formally revoke the company's royalty-free license to use my 3 core algorithm patents." On the other end of the line, Davis paused for a beat. Then came the crisp rustle of turning pages. "Understood, sir. The proxy agreement and original capital contribution proofs have been stored safely in our highest tier vault. Per the explicit default clauses, any unauthorized removal of your operational control or a breach of contract termination automatically voids the proxy relationship. You may reclaim your 85% actual equity stake at any moment. Furthermore, since the core patents are registered entirely under your personal name, the revocation notice will take full legal effect within 24 hours. I tilted my head back, looking up at the cloudless blue sky above the metropolis. "Don't alert them just yet," I murmured. "Let them celebrate for a couple of days. I want to see what they intend to deliver to the investors once I'm out of the equation." I hung up and took a long, deep breath of air, feeling the late summer heat settle over my skin. Evelyn believed she was discarding a dull, unambitious husband who stood in the way of her social climbing. She had no idea that what she had severed today was the sole pillar supporting her entire lavish life. I returned to the apartment where we had lived for the past 3 years. On the coffee table in the living room sat bottles of men's cologne and high-end skincare products belonging to Carter. Over the past 2 weeks, Carter had been coming and going under the guise of late-night strategy sessions. Every time, Evelyn brushed it off, telling me Carter had spent years working abroad and simply had a more open lifestyle, telling me not to overthink it. I opened the safe in my study and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Inside were the original bank transaction records from 4 years ago showing my capital injection, the proxy agreement, and the patent certificates for the 3 core algorithms. When Evelyn and I got married 4 years ago, her family's business had just gone bankrupt. To help her get back on her feet, and to ensure my proprietary algorithms wouldn't trigger the non-compete clause from my previous employer, I decided to fully fund the company myself while registering 100% of the nominal shares under her name. Privately, we executed a legally airtight equity proxy and asset trust agreement. The contract stated unequivocally that Evelyn held the shares merely as a nominal proxy, while I retained an 85% actual equity stake alongside final voting authority. If either party filed for divorce or committed a material breach, the proxy relationship would terminate immediately, and the shares would unconditionally revert back to my name. For years, I was content staying in the background as a quiet CTO, handing her every ounce of spotlight and glory. I thought that was what partnership meant, until 6 months ago, when Carter joined the firm as a senior partner. Evelyn's attitude took a sharp, bitter turn. She started looking down on me for not playing golf, for not wearing tailored suits, and for spending all my time huddled in server rooms writing code. She even began telling people in her social circle that the company's success was entirely due to her business genius, dismissing me as nothing more than a lucky programmer who happened to ride her coattails. My thoughts were interrupted by the chime of the smart lock at the front door. Evelyn's high heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Carter followed right behind her, carrying 2 bottles of expensive red wine. When Evelyn saw me sitting in the living room, her brows instantly knit into a scowl. "Eric, why haven't you packed your things and left yet?" Her voice snapped with disgust. "Carter is staying over tonight so we can review the final closing details for the funding. It's completely inappropriate for you to be here." Carter smiled smoothly, slinging his suit jacket off and hanging it on the coat rack by the entrance, as if he were the master of the house. "Eric, don't make this awkward for everyone," Carter said, stepping up to the wet bar and reaching for 2 crystal wine glasses. "Evelyn is doing what's best for the company's growth. Having you linger around will only drag down our momentum. Moving on is better for all of us." I slipped the documents into my leather briefcase and looked at them calmly. "Evelyn," I said, "the underlying algorithm architecture was written entirely by me. All core node verifications run through my private servers. Carter promised the investors today that he would double system throughput. Doing that will cause the underlying distributed databases to hit a deadlock and collapse. If you rescind the termination right now and abide by our original agreements, I can ensure the closing demonstration goes off without a hitch." Evelyn stared at me as if I had uttered the most absurd joke she had ever heard, bursting into a cold laugh. "Eric, are you really still trying to use these cheap little tricks to threaten me?" She walked up to me, looking down with outright disdain. "Do you genuinely believe this company can't survive without you? Carter graduated from an Ivy League institution with top honors. The engineering team he brought in cleared out your codebase days ago. Did you really think the code you wrote was some irreplaceable, God-given corporate secret?" Carter shook his head, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Eric, the fundamental flaw with engineers like you is arrogant self-importance. I reviewed your code carefully yesterday. It's cluttered with redundant structures and lacks modern, streamlined design principles. I've already instructed the team to refactor it overnight. During tomorrow morning's load test, we will show the investors what true efficiency actually looks like." I looked at the two of them, bloated with unearned confidence. Carter didn't understand a damn thing. What he called redundant structures was a dynamic logic buffer I had painstakingly built to prevent deadlocks during high-frequency concurrency spikes. Without that buffer, the moment concurrent requests crossed the critical threshold, the entire cluster would freeze up within 3 seconds. Since they were so determined to walk off a cliff, I saw no reason to keep playing savior. "Fine," I said, zipping up my bag. "If you're both that confident, I wish you the best of luck with tomorrow's test." I stood up. Evelyn stepped into my path, holding out an open hand. "Hand over the apartment keys and all access cards. This property is registered under my name and belongs to the company. Since you are no longer an employee, you have no right to stay here." I looked at her face, refined, polished, yet entirely unrecognizable. I had paid the down payment for this apartment out of my personal savings years ago, agreeing to put her name on the title only to satisfy her vanity. "I have complete bank records proving the origin of the down payment," I said quietly, meeting her eyes. "Evelyn, I hope you don't grow to regret a single decision you've made today." Evelyn threw her head back, her voice raising an octave in sharp ridicule. "Regret? The single best decision I've made in my life was bringing Carter into this firm and kicking out an unambitious deadweight like you. Now get out. Stop ruining our celebration." I laid the keys flat on the entry table and walked out without looking back. As the elevator doors slid shut, the faint clinking of wine glasses and light laughter drifted through the closing gap. I walked down to the street and slid into the back seat of Davis's black sedan. Davis handed a document over from the front passenger seat. Sir, the notice revoking patent usage rights has been formally delivered to both the Patent Office and the company's legal department via digital signature and certified mail. Additionally, the court has officially docketed our equity ownership lawsuit. An asset freezing order will be issued before tomorrow morning's hearing. I checked the timestamp on the papers and closed the folder. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning is when they're scheduled to sign the final closing documents with the VCs. Right. Davis gave a subtle nod. Correct. Victor and his investment committee will be on site to witness the live high concurrency stress test. Perfect. I leaned back against the headrest, watching the neon lights of the city glide across the window. Carter wants to prove his architecture is superior to mine, doesn't he? Tomorrow, I'll make sure he gets a front row seat to a real technical disaster. At 9:30 the next morning, the financial district was humming with activity. I sat by the window of a coffee shop directly across from the corporate tower, my laptop open on the small table. My screen displayed a real-time monitoring dashboard pulling telemetry from our old server infrastructure. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass across the street, I could see clearly into the 23rd floor executive boardroom. Victor and his entire due diligence team were already seated around the table. Evelyn, dressed in a crisp, high-end white pantsuit, carried a bright smile as she poured coffee for the guests. Carter stood at the head of the room beside the main display, gesturing sharply with a pointer, looking every bit the poised executive. To prove his superiority, he had completely purged my logic buffer and manually doubled the test payload parameters. At 9:50, the live load test kicked off. Carter clicked the execution button with a smooth, confident flourish. The main display lit up, numbers cascading down as the system began processing simulated high-frequency transactions. For the first few seconds, throughput numbers shot up rapidly. Victor nodded slightly, a look of cautious approval on his face. Evelyn stood nearby, her lips curling into a triumphant smile, her eyes shining with pride. Then, the moment data volume crossed the critical threshold, the server CPU utilization spiked instantly to 99%. Without the underlying buffer to arbitrate incoming requests, the distributed nodes hit a massive deadlock condition. Data packets backed up instantly in memory. Error codes flooded the back-end monitoring terminals like a torrential downpour. On the main display, the test progress bar froze solid. A heartbeat later, the entire demonstration software went completely black. The atmosphere in the boardroom plunged into an arctic chill. The smile on Evelyn's face shattered. Carter's complexion drained of all color. His hands flew over the keyboard in a frantic panic, attempting to force a manual service restart. Process after process failed. Every attempt triggered the system's deadlock protections, setting off flashing red overload alerts across the monitoring panels. Victor slowly withdrew his gaze from the screen, his expression hardening into stone. "Mr. Carter," Victor said, knocking his knuckles against the table. "Is this the double throughput you promised us?" "It's just a minor system hiccup," Carter stammered, sweat breaking out across his forehead, his voice cracking. "It must be network latency or a flaw in the testing script. Give me 5 minutes. I'll isolate the issue immediately." Carter turned and began barking orders at the team of engineers behind him, forcing them to patch the production code on the fly. Without an understanding of the underlying logic, blind edits only compounded the failure. 3 minutes later, the main database executed an emergency thermal shutdown to prevent hardware corruption. Victor stood up, calmly buttoning his suit jacket. "President Evelyn," Victor said, his tone devoid of emotion, "our firm allocates capital to robust, reliable core technology, not a fragile, unstable system prone to total failure. During yesterday's meeting, Eric explicitly warned us about compatibility boundaries under load, and you personally guaranteed that Carter could replace him effortlessly. It appears you haven't just lost your primary technical core. You've lost the basic capacity for risk management." Evelyn panicked entirely. She rushed forward, grabbing Victor's arm, her voice trembling. "Mr. Victor, please, give us one more chance. This is just an unexpected integration bug. We can have this resolved within 24 hours. Victor coldly pulled his arm out of her grasp. 24 hours? "Evelyn, our second installment of $10 million was scheduled to be wired this afternoon. Until you resolve these fundamental structural defects, all funding is suspended indefinitely. Furthermore, if your technical failures cause financial damages to our initial investment, we reserve full rights to pursue legal action." Victor turned and walked out of the conference room, his entire team falling into line behind him. Left behind in the silent room were a pale, desperate Evelyn and Carter, who collapsed into a chair, breathing heavily. Carter began cursing under his breath. "It's Eric! That bastard put a backdoor in the code. He deliberately sabotaged us." Evelyn seized on the idea like a drowning woman reaching for a straw, pulling out her phone to dial my number. Across the street. My phone buzzed against the wooden table. I slid it open and placed it on speaker. "Eric, what the hell did you do to the back-end system?" Evelyn's shrill, frantic voice burst through the speaker. "Get back to the office this instant and fix the servers. If your petty revenge ruins this funding round, I swear I will sue you until you don't have a penny left to your name." I took a slow sip of my coffee, my voice entirely flat. "Evelyn, you were the one who personally handed me my termination papers yesterday, and Carter was the one who assured our investors my code was redundant and poorly built. He refactored the entire stack himself. When his build crashes under load, it's a reflection of his competence. What does that have to do with a fired ex-employee?" Evelyn's voice softened suddenly, shifting into a strained, manipulative plea. "Eric, please, I'm asking you. Just come back and help us through this. Okay? This company represents years of our shared hard work. If it goes under, what do you gain from that? If you come back right now and resolve the server issue, I can talk to the board about reinstating you as CTO." I let out a soft, faint laugh. "Reinstating me as CTO? Evelyn, you still haven't grasped what's happening here. I told you yesterday. I hope you don't live to regret your choices." Without waiting for her reply, I disconnected the call and added her number straight to my block list. Looking across the street at the two figures unraveling inside the glass tower, I closed my laptop lid. A technical system crash was merely the opening act. What was coming next was the total collapse of the empire they thought they owned. Leaving the coffee shop, I headed straight to the top-floor conference room of Davis's law firm. Davis had organized the signed legal binders, lining them up neatly across the dark wood table. "Sir, the formal notices revoking the company's patent licensing rights have been delivered to both the patent office and the company's legal team," Davis reported, adjusting his glasses as he pushed a stamped document toward me. "Additionally, regarding the asset freezing order for the original equity proxy and asset trust agreement, the district court issued an injunction 20 minutes ago. The order explicitly freezes 100% of the nominal shares registered under Evelyn's name, barring any transfer, pledge, or dividend distribution." I flipped open the binder. The red ink of the judicial stamp gleamed clearly on the page. For years ago, to give Evelyn the standing she needed in business circles, I had registered the corporate entity under her name. Every cent of the initial capital, however, came directly from my personal bank accounts, fully backed by third-party notarization. The trust agreement was unequivocal. Evelyn was merely a nominal holder with zero legal authority to alienate or encumber the assets without my express written consent. "What about Carter's side?" I asked. "Last month, Carter persuaded Evelyn to secretly pledge 15% of the nominal equity to an offshore holding company under his name, claiming it was in exchange for overseas technical resources." Davis let out a dry, dismissive laugh. "It's a textbook unauthorized disposition of trust assets, a blatant breach of contract and fraud. Not only can we render that pledge legally null and void, but the action itself directly triggers the immediate termination clause of the proxy agreement, allowing us to demand the complete surrender and transfer of all equity back to your name." I shut the folder, my eyes cold. To play up to Carter, Evelyn had handed over the company's foundational equity without a second thought. She truly believed she was the master of her domain, oblivious to the fact that she was merely holding my property in trust. At 2 in the afternoon, accompanied by Davis and 2 court enforcement officers, I stepped back into our corporate headquarters. The moment we passed the lobby, a heated argument echoed down the main hallway. Evelyn stood near the reception area, her face pale, while Carter gripped her arm tightly, his face flushed with panic. "Evelyn, Victor's firm just sent over a formal notice revoking their term sheet," Carter shouted, his voice tight with fear. "If we can't fix the core matching architecture by this afternoon, we're going to be liable for double damages on the initial funding under the breach clause." "Didn't you tell me Eric was just a docile, obedient loser? Why is he refusing your calls? Can you get him back here or not?" Evelyn looked completely undone, her hair messy, all her previous confidence evaporated. "Carter, stop yelling at me. You were the one who swore up and down yesterday that you could rewrite his code in a night. I can't reach him right now. What do you expect me to do? Just then, her eyes caught sight of Davis and me entering through the main doors. A sudden surge of resentment and desperate hope flashed across her face. She broke free from Carter's grip and rushed toward me. Eric, you finally showed up, she yelled, pointing a finger at my face. You left on purpose. You left this broken system behind just to watch me fail. Didn't you? I'm telling you. Walk into that server room and fix the database right now. Otherwise, I will sue you for sabotage and theft of trade secrets. Carter stepped up alongside her, puffing out his chest to assume a righteous posture. Eric, as a former employee, maliciously tampering with core company infrastructure upon departure is a serious crime. If you admit your fault now and restore the service, Evelyn and I might consider not involving the police. I stared at the frantic pair in front of me without so much as raising an eyebrow. I simply stepped to the side. Davis smoothly stepped into the gap, thrusting 2 sets of court orders and legal notices directly into Evelyn's and Carter's hands. Ms. Evelyn, Mr. Carter, I suggest you watch your tone, Davis said, his deep, resonant voice carrying clearly across the silent office floor. I am Davis, lead legal counsel representing Mr. Eric. On behalf of my client, I am formally serving you with the court's asset freezing order and the notice of termination of equity proxy agreement. Evelyn stared down at the red court seal stamped on the cover page, her pupils contracting sharply. Equity proxy? What kind of nonsense is this? I built this company from the ground up. The proxy contract bears your personal signature and a formal notary seal. Davis interrupted, his tone sharp as a razor. Mr. Eric is the sole source of capital for this firm and the 85% actual owner of all equity. Your unauthorized pledge of 15% of the company's equity to Mr. Carter constitutes a material breach of your fiduciary duties. As of this moment, the court has placed a complete freeze on all equity under your name, as well as the company's primary operational accounts. Carter's face drained of color in an instant. He stared down at the document, his voice trembling violently. That's impossible. That's completely impossible. She's listed as the sole shareholder, Mr. Carter. Your receipt of an illegal equity pledge makes you a party to the unlawful conversion of trust assets. Davis turned to Carter, his eyes hard. Furthermore, we have filed the formal revocation of patent licensing with the regulatory agencies. The 3 core algorithms this company relies upon belong entirely to Mr. Eric as individual intellectual property. Starting today, any continued operation of those algorithms by this firm constitutes willful patent infringement. We will be applying for an immediate injunction to halt all business operations. A collective gasp echoed across the floor. The employees standing around the cubicle stared at Evelyn and Carter in sheer disbelief. They had spent years believing Evelyn was a brilliant, self-made female founder, and that I was just a quiet husband living off her success. None of them could have anticipated that the true owner behind this tech unicorn was the very man they had watched get fired 2 days ago. Evelyn swayed on her feet, taking 2 shaky steps back as the papers slipped from her fingers and scattered across the floor. She raised her head, looking at me with absolute shock and dread. Eric, you're lying to me. Right. How could you do all of this behind my back? I looked down at her, my expression devoid of all heat. Evelyn, I gave you countless opportunities. You were the one who signed that termination agreement with your own hand. Since you chose Carter, and since you chose to throw me out, you can now deal with the consequences of your choices. 3 days after the freezing order was served, an emergency extraordinary general meeting was convened at headquarters. The main boardroom was dead silent. Victor sat at the head of the long table representing the lead VC firm, flanked by his chief compliance officer and lead auditor. Evelyn looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her hollow eyes, her designer suit rumpled and unkempt. Carter sat beside her, his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles white from tension. I walked into the room alongside Davis, taking our seats across from them. Victor offered me a firm, respectful nod. Mr. Eric, thank you for coming, Victor began smoothly. The purpose of today's session is to establish complete legal clarity regarding the actual ownership of this company, its core technology, and the disposition of our initial capital deployment. Evelyn bolted upright in her chair, her voice hoarse. Mr. Victor, the equity freeze is merely a temporary procedural dispute. I am the registered legal representative of this corporation, and operational authority remains with me. Carter's engineering team is reallocating resources right now. We are fully capable of writing an alternative matching engine from scratch. Victor looked at her coldly, picking up a bound audit report and slapping it hard onto the center of the table. President Evelyn, or rather, former President Evelyn, Victor said, his tone biting. According to our forensic audit team's investigation over the past 48 hours, your unauthorized pledge of 15% equity to Carter constitutes unlawful conversion of trust assets. Even more egregious, the senior overseas development firm Carter claimed to bring in is nothing more than a shell company registered in an offshore tax haven, completely owned by Carter himself. You quietly routed nearly $3 million of the company's R&D budget into Carter's offshore entity over the last 6 months. And the broken code they delivered directly caused the catastrophic collapse of our live stress test 3 days ago. The air in the room instantly turned to stone. Evelyn whipped her head around toward Carter, her eyes wide with shock and horror. Carter, is what Mr. Victor's saying true? You told me that was your top-tier research center in Europe. Cold sweat poured down Carter's forehead. His eyes darted around the room as he stammered out an excuse. Evelyn, listen to me. It was an operational strategy. We were simply consolidating technical assets. Consolidating? Evelyn's scream echoed off the glass walls. You call stealing company capital to fund your own fake shell corporation consolidating? She finally understood. She thought she had found a brilliant, high society partner to elevate her life, when in reality she was nothing more than an easy target for a scam artist. Seeing the game was up, Carter's face twisted into an ugly, sneering grin. Evelyn, you have no one to blame for your own stupidity. If you hadn't come complaining to me every single day about how boring and useless Eric was, if you hadn't been so desperate to elevate me to satisfy your own pathetic vanity, do you think I ever would have had the chance? You were the one who threw Eric out. You were the one who stamped the wire transfers. Your signature is on every single legal document. Carter, you rotten bastard! Evelyn shrieked, her hands trembling violently as tears burst from her eyes, watching the two of them turn on each other like wild dogs. I calmly unzipped my briefcase, taking out several notarized files and passing them down the table to Victor. Mr. Victor, these are the original bank records showing my personal capital injections 4 years ago, along with the notarized equity proxy and asset trust agreement. Furthermore, the Patent Authority has officially issued a cease and desist directive, revoking all rights for this company to utilize my 3 core matching patents. Victor examined the documents carefully, his eyes growing brighter with every page he turned. He closed the folder and gave a slow, decisive nod. Mr. Eric, the facts are indisputable. Ms. Evelyn abused her role as a nominal proxy, severely damaging the company and its investors, committing a material breach of contract. Our investment firm will formally support your petition to terminate the proxy agreement and restore your 100% actual ownership stake. Victor then turned to look at Evelyn and Carter, his voice completely devoid of empathy. Additionally, based on the clear evidence of grand larceny, fraud, and embezzlement committed by Ms. Evelyn and Mr. Carter, our legal team will be filing formal criminal charges with law enforcement immediately to recover all misallocated funds. Evelyn's legs gave out, and she collapsed heavily back into her executive chair. She looked across the table at me, her eyes filled with desperation, sorrow, and pleading. Eric, I'm your wife. Her voice broke into quiet, trembling sobs. We have 4 years of marriage together. You can't do this to me. I was tricked by Carter. He manipulated me. Please, forgive me just this once. Can we start over? The company can belong to both of us. I'll listen to everything you say from now on. She leaned across the table, reaching out frantically to grab my sleeve. I took a step back, out of her reach, looking down at her with cold detachment. Evelyn, the moment you threw that termination paper in my face in front of the board, whatever we had was dead. You aren't sorry for what you did to me. You're just terrified that you lost. Davis stepped forward, positioning himself firmly between Evelyn and me. Ms. Evelyn, please be advised that Mr. Eric has formally instructed me to file for divorce, regarding your unauthorized transfer of marital assets and illegal pledge of corporate equity. We will be pursuing full legal accountability. Carter, his face ash gray, attempted to quietly slip out the back door of the boardroom, only to be blocked by 2 police officers and corporate security guards who had been waiting outside. The only sound left in the boardroom was Evelyn's hopeless, ringing weeping. I turned away without a second glance and walked out into the corridor. The court's final judgment came down even faster than expected. Faced with an ironclad paper trail of initial capital transfers, notarized trust agreements, and patent ownership records, the judge ruled in favor of immediately terminating the equity proxy relationship between Evelyn and me. 85% of the corporate shares were formally transferred back under my name. The remaining 15%, having been illegally pledged, was seized by the court for asset liquidation. Evelyn was formally indicted by the prosecutor's office for corporate fraud and embezzlement regarding the $3 million in misappropriated R&D funds. Carter's offshore entity was frozen and dismantled. He was arrested on multiple counts of corporate fraud, his passport confiscated, and remanded to a holding facility pending trial, facing a lengthy prison sentence. When the final hearing concluded, I stood on the wide stone steps outside the courthouse. A soft, cool rain was falling over the city. Evelyn stepped out of the heavy doors under the escort of 2 bailiffs, wearing the simple gray jumpsuit of the detention center. Her face was deathly pale, fine lines visible around her eyes, her former glamour completely stripped away. When she spotted me standing at the top of the stairs, she violently broke away from the guards and scrambled toward me. With a heavy thud, she dropped straight to her knees on the cold, wet stone. The rain soaked her hair, plastering it against her forehead as she wept uncontrollably. "Eric, please, please save me," she sobbed, grabbing at my pant leg, her voice raw with terror. "I know I was wrong. I truly know I was wrong. I shouldn't have listened to Carter's lies. I shouldn't have fired you in that meeting. I shouldn't have treated you like that. The lawyer says I'm facing at least 7 years in prison. Eric, I can't go to prison. My life will be completely over. For the sake of our 4 years together, please drop the charges with the prosecutor. I don't want anything anymore, the company, the apartment, the cars. You can have it all. I'll sign a clean break." I lowered my head, looking down at the woman who had once shared my life, but had lost herself entirely to ambition and vanity. In my eyes, there was no lingering anger, no satisfaction, only a quiet, absolute stillness. "Evelyn," I said softly, my voice calm and steady, "when you threw that termination agreement at me in the boardroom, did you give a single thought to our 4 years together? When you ridiculed my work to lift Carter up, did you ever stop to leave me a path out? You didn't." I leaned down and firmly unclasped her wet fingers from my pants. "You don't regret what you did to me," I said quietly. "You're just afraid of serving time. Every adult has to answer for the choices they make. The law will decide what you deserve." Evelyn's hands slipped uselessly to the stone. She slumped back into the rain, her eyes hollow, the very last flicker of hope draining from her face. The bailiff stepped up, pulling her to her feet and leading her toward the waiting transport van. The siren faded into the distance, swallowed up by the noise of the city streets. 2 weeks later, the company held an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. I stood on the stage, flanked by Victor and a newly recruited team of industry-leading technical executives. Victor took the microphone and announced to the entire firm that the VC group was officially expanding its funding round to $30 million, restoring me as the sole CEO and controlling owner of the company. The employees in the hall broke into thunderous applause. Those who had once sided with Carter or looked down on me kept their heads low, fidgeting uncomfortably in their seats. I didn't launch a sweeping purge. Instead, I allowed corporate compliance to handle anyone directly involved in the embezzlement scheme in accordance with company policy and the law. As for the 3 core patents under my name, I executed a new, exclusive licensing arrangement with the firm. With the server architecture under my direct supervision, the matching engine was fine-tuned to perfection. When we reran the high concurrency stress test, the system didn't just smash previous throughput limits, it ran with absolute, flawless stability for 72 straight hours. On the day of the product relaunch, major financial outlets covered the dramatic corporate turnaround. The man the media had once written off as a sidelined engineer was now featured on the cover of leading business magazines as the founder and CEO of a top-tier tech unicorn. That evening, I stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling windows of a high-altitude bar overlooking the skyline. Below, the city lights stretched out like a galaxy of gold and silver. The internal backstabbing was over. The betrayal and deceit had been swept away. I had reclaimed everything that belonged to me, completely purging the toxicity from my life. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Davis. The divorce decree was officially finalized, and the liquidation of Evelyn's remaining assets was complete. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, taking a slow sip of the iced whiskey in my hand. The night breeze was crisp and clear, the road ahead was wide open, and my time had just begun.